And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time to talk about military history, doctrine, and leadership practices, and then turn them into lessons that we can apply to our businesses and professional practices. So today is the third installment of the group of sessions I'm doing on Alfred Thayer Mahan's book, great book, really, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, 1660 to 1783. It was written in 1890. It had enormous influence on not just the United States, but on countries throughout the world. And it was, in fact, the go-to doctrine for developing naval power from the very late 19th and into the early and mid 20th century. So, and while I think Mahan is not as widely followed today as he was in the past, nonetheless, his ideas, his doctrine remains relevant to both navies and those of us who run businesses. So I'm going to jump right into the ideas that I've put together for episode number 3. And if you're interested in what came before this, so I invite you to go to my YouTube channel and look up Business Lessons from the Military for the previous 2 weeks, and you'll get a longer introduction and biography of Alfred Thayer Mahan, first of all, in episode 1. And then on each episode, I discuss 5 ideas from his famous book. So for today, idea number 1 or concept number 1. So concentration beats dispersion. So when one is considering how to impact a situation using naval power, okay, a concentration of ships, a concentration of force is much more powerful than a dispersion of force. So if you've read any of the great naval fiction of the 19th century, whether it's the Horatio Hornblower novels or the Patrick O'Brien's novels about Master and Commander, Stephen Maturin, and I'm going up on his famous sea captain character. But anyway, a lot of those books revolve around single frigate actions or single ship actions. Makes them very exciting. Here's the thing. That was not how Great Britain came to dominate the seas. Okay, while there was a great deal of incentive for the captain of a ship to engage in a single ship battle, because if he won, it could dramatically increase his prospects for promotion, not to mention that the prize money that would come from defeating a ship, a larger share of it went to him. Most of the great English victories were fleet victories, and it was the fact that Great Britain had such a powerful fleet that gave it dominance of the seas. So throughout the 19th century, really England enjoyed almost unfettered command of the seaways. And it was because of the number of ships it had, its ability to have concentrated forces in several locations, the Caribbean, in and around England, into the Mediterranean. So the just this the size and ability to amass force is what made English sea power so dominant, and likely made it the decisive power in an engagement between nations. So as we apply this to the business world, so the reality is focus outperforms diversification if that diversification isn't done at scale. Okay, so when you think about your own business, what is your core business? And until you become, if not an absolutely dominant force, a very strong force within your core business, diversification isn't of any value. Okay, because it's more likely to dilute your overall success than it is to enhance it. Okay, so if you look at my business as an example, so my core business is administrating trusts and probates. Okay, anything that I do that detracts from that will also diminish my impact in the marketplace. So you might say, well, why do you do these shows? Pardon me. Well, I do them in order to, at least in part, to develop relationships with other professionals that will make my business, my core business, stronger. So if you watch my Monday show, Trusts and Estates Weekly, you will notice that this year especially, I have a lot more guests. Okay, I've already recorded episodes with, I think, 4 or 5 guests. The year is only not even 3 weeks old, and I have another, I think, 5 or 6 coming up. And so while I've always had guests on that show, this year, because I have more time to focus on developing that particular show, so I'll have more guests on, and that will help me build stronger relationships with these people who are both sources of knowledge and information for me. They're potential sources of business, as I am for them, right? And so we can get to know each other better, develop stronger relationships, and the undergirding of any kind of service business like mine is the strength of relationships. Okay, so why do I continue to do this show and other shows? So it's to put my my knowledge, my reputation out there, so that people can see, hey, Kevin is a credible professional. So he understands business issues, he understands probate and trust issues, business issues for this show. My show on Wednesdays, People Making Money, is a broad array of business and wealth building topics. And again, all of those are important in the work that I do as a independent trustee and probate administrator. Okay, and so it helps establish my credibility. So that's why I do my shows. Now, Jiggers' place is different. It's because I like cocktails and schmoozing, but we have to have a little enjoyment in our lives, right? So the key aspect of this is that if we're going to diversify into another business, okay, we need to be able to do so at scale without negatively impacting our existing core business. Okay, because that dilution then it brings down our overall the overall quality of our business. Okay, that's number one. Number two, decisive moments matter more than constant action. Okay, and this is I think a hard one for many of us, especially if we've worked for someone else, okay, uh, there's an incentive to make sure that our boss sees us doing stuff, is really what it comes down to. Okay. But the reality is, in our own businesses, activity isn't meaningful unless it's the right activity at the right moment. Okay. So, from a naval perspective, okay, so waiting for the right engagement was often decisive. Okay. So, if you look at the Battle of Trafalgar, which the great English victory over France. Um, um, I'm thinking Horatio Nelson. That guy had Horatio Hornblower in my head from the book. Horatio Nelson, Admiral Nelson, was looking for that decisive engagement where he could mass his forces and defeat the French. Now, tragically, he was killed, but but England defeated the Royal Navy defeated the French Navy soundly at the Battle of Trafalgar, and that's what's important from the standpoint of creating just waiting or creating a decisive moment. For Nelson to have constantly been moving his ships around and here and there, and just making sure they're active. No, that's not productive. In fact, he needed to be patient and watch how the French were responding to the probes he would make along their northern coast, and then look for that opportunity where he could bring the Royal Navy's power to bear and create a decisive victory. Okay, so premature battles would just have wasted the Navy's strength in terms of manpower, first and foremost, but also in terms of materiel, cannonballs, and then damage to ships, spars, spare sails, all that kind of thing. And I use the 19th century uh, Royal Navy partly because I think most of us have a sense about it, but it was no different in World War II in the Pacific, for example, the Pacific Theater of Operations. So, the U.S. Navy fought in task forces, task groups. Okay, with the exception of submarines, there weren't any single ship engagements in World War II. They would not be decisive, and if you look at, for example, the Battle of Midway, where the United States Navy sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, effectively, really, I mean, I don't want to say it destroyed the Japanese Navy, because that was clearly not the case, but the Japanese Navy never recovered from Midway. The Japanese too thought that Midway would be decisive, a decisive victory over the Americans after Pearl Harbor. But it didn't turn out that way, right? And so after Midway, it really wasn't a matter of if the United States was going to prevail in the Pacific. It was really a matter of when and at what cost. Okay. So, moving back to a business focus on this. So, timing in business matters more than activity. We can be running around, we can be putting an ad here or an ad there. I know I was talking to my older sister Marla on Sunday. We were talking about her business and how she can grow it, and she was talking about different things. And the most important thing that she's a therapist, by the way. So the most important thing that she can do is look for the places where she can be most effective. Okay, so she specializes in therapy for children. So where are there places where adults are engaged with children in a way that allows them to understand when a child needs psychological support? Okay. Having identified those places, and they may be a large church, they may be a large child care company, something like that. So having identified the places, then she needs to time her engagements with them so that they have an opportunity, so that her engagement is impactful, and they can see that this is someone who can have a positive impact on the well-being of the children under our care. Okay, as opposed to trying to get business from 100 different sources. She'll be better off focusing on maybe 5 to 10 and really making an impact, being careful to properly time each of her contacts with them. And that's true not just for my sister, who's a therapist, or my business as a professional fiduciary, but for every business, large and small. Okay? How we time our interactions uh, is really what becomes decisive. And then exercising patience. So patience is a competitive advantage, right? Now, I don't know about you, patience is not my strong suit. I want it to happen, and I want it to happen now, right? Daddy, I wanted Oompa Loompa and I want him now, right? I think that's a pretty common human trait, but it's not one that in which we can indulge. We have to be patient and look for the right opportunities. Okay, number 3, command of the environment provides or precedes victory. So control of the seas shaped all subsequent outcomes. Okay. And I'm going to go back to the example of the Royal Navy. Okay. They had control of the seas, and as a result, they became the most powerful empire really in history. Okay. I'm not saying they were the most powerful nation, because the United States today is undoubtedly more powerful than Great Britain was in the 19th century. Okay. But the United States doesn't have anything like the global empire that Great Britain had through the 19th and into the early 20th century. And in fact, that empire really didn't start unraveling until sort of post World War I, and then into the post World War II era. Okay, so the control of the seas shaped all the outcomes that came after it. So by carefully timing its engagements, okay, the Royal Navy was able to become dominant. So it wasn't just that it had the largest number of ships, the best trained sailors, the best logistically supplied navy. All of those were essentially true, okay? But it's that it timed its engagements properly so as to overwhelm the enemy, and then create really take control of the seas. Okay, let's take a quick break, and I'll be back to translate this one into business. America is a maritime nation. Our freedom and security depend on strong sea services. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League stands with our Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marine through community support, education, and advocacy. For over 120 years, Americans of all walks of life have heeded our call. No prior military service is required to join our mission. The Beverly Hills Council of the Navy League of the United States. Help us support those who serve at sea. Visit NavyLeague.org. Okay, so I was just talking about command of the environment precedes victory. So once the Royal Navy had taken command of the seas, so in a way, victory was the natural outgrowth of that. So on the business side of things, we need to shape the market before competing in it. Okay, so what is our market? Okay, well, I'll use my business as an example. My business is the market is probates that need to be administrated, meaning there's a whole variety of tasks that need to be completed so that then whatever money was left by the decedent can be distributed to the heirs. Now, for a lot of the work that for a lot of probates, I should say, they don't need me. They're simple, there's no dispute. And so, the child of the decedent can probably handle it, maybe with a little nudging by, the judge. Okay. So that's not my market. My market is not the sum total of probates going on. My market, and the way I explain it to, I market primarily to attorneys. The way I explain it is, I want to be involved in probate situations where I can add value, where it's worthwhile for the estate to bring me in. What are those situations? Well, number one, there's a dispute going on, typically between the heirs, and they're fighting over, in essence, who's going to control the estate. And neither side wants to let the other side do so because they're afraid they'll get cheated. Okay, so then I can come in as a neutral third party and administrate the estate without being beholden to either side, or there can even be three sides or more. Okay, that's number one. Number two, it has to be large enough so that it has enough complexity that a layperson is less likely to be effective. Okay, so most of the estates that with which I get involved have real estate involved, and where I have a long background professionally. They may have a business involved where I have a long history of dealing with businesses, running businesses, advising businesses, etc. And they may have some other kinds of complex assets. So they may have intellectual property, another asset class in which I have a lot of experience, or they may have, kind of weird other, not weird, but unusual personal property. So I'm handling an estate right now. The estate must have something like, I don't know, 10,000 vinyl records or some crazy, there's so many, I couldn't possibly count them, right? They have a couple of jukeboxes. They have an entire room filled with drums, just with drums, like, beating on a drum, right? So there's this whole range of personal property, and a lot of which I've had experience handling at kind of a high level, right? So then I can bring in the experts, and I can oversee them properly for the benefit of the estate. Okay, whereas a layperson who's never dealt with this type of thing, it would be much more difficult, even to just talk to the different vendors or consultants that need to be brought on board may be difficult. Okay, so there's typically a level of complexity. Now, by the way, I'm handling one estate where there's really just one asset in the estate. It's a house. Okay, but I was brought in because there had been a tremendous amount of fraud perpetrated by the heirs on the creditors to the estate. Okay, and the creditors had to wrest control of the estate from the heirs in order to have any chance at all of getting payment on any of the debts that the estate owned. And so, because of the complex legal issues, okay, I was asked to be involved in that estate. So when I think about command of the environment, what I'm looking at is shaping up the market for my services. And that's a market that has complexity, it has disputes, okay? And it has unusual, I'll call it, has unusual aspects to it, okay? So those three qualities are how I shape my market. And by doing so, okay, when I go into a situation, okay, I've already created a market in which I'm a good fit. Okay. That's what each of us needs to do with our businesses. Okay. So whether you're a therapist like my sister, whether you have a plumbing business, whether you have some kind of technology business, okay, the challenge is defining what you do. Sometimes we call it, your value proposition or your competitive position. So I just ended up doing this, not ended up, I just did this for a business in which I'm a partner, and figuring out what is our value proposition for each of the types of clients that we need to target. Okay. And in this case, it's a brand new business. It's got a pretty new idea behind it. And so we can't be sure at this early stage which category is the ideal client. So we have actually six potential client categories. Okay. And which of those six are going to end up being the right ones? We're going to see. And I'm going to develop that over the next 3 months. That's one of my primary roles in this company, right? It's called Embody Systems. I'll put it out there. You can check out embodysystem.com if you want to see what it's about. Okay, so we'll end up most likely narrowing down the 6 to 2 or maybe 3, on which we'll then seek to more broadly shape the market as we then enter into it and start actually looking for business. Okay. All right. So command of the environment precedes victory. Next, offense creates strategic freedom. So when one has command of the environment, when one has the patience to wait for decisive moments, so then one can go on the offense, okay? And that forces opponents to have to react, as opposed to respond, okay? This is one of my favorite distinctions I ever learned in all of the business. Back in the early days of my business, we didn't have podcasts. We listened to cassette tapes and CDs. I believe it was Zig Ziglar who taught me this, but I'm not 100% positive. But when we think about those two actions, if you will, react and respond, think of them in terms of when we go to the doctor and the doctor gives us, he diagnoses us and then he gives us some medicine to take, right? If the doctor says, oh, you're reacting to the medicine, okay, that's not good. Okay, we don't want to be reacting, because that means react in that context means a negative reaction. Okay. If the doctor says, you're responding to the medicine, that's good, because responding in this context means responding well. In other words, the medicine is positively dealing with the problem, right? So in the same way, when we're talking about a potential naval engagement, if we force the enemy to react, they have to do so quickly, probably in a less organized or even a disorganized way, and that makes it easier for the Navy on the offensive to attain victory. Okay, as opposed to if the enemy can respond at its leisure, right? And that's the idea of such things as fortifications, where a naval force may invade a harbor and there's fortifications, so they're set to respond. They don't have to react. Okay, so the same thing is true in the business world. So we want to create a proactive strategy, one that in essence sets the industry norms. Okay. So I'll give you, again, I'm going to use my own business as an example of this. So one of the things I recognized very early on in administrating trusts and probates was there wasn't a lot of communication flow between the different interested parties. And from my perspective, I thought that was bad because there's nothing like lack of communication or miscommunication to cause people to misperceive what's going on, potentially get angry. Okay. And now my job is more difficult. So I very, very early on in my involvement in this area made it a practice of sending out a weekly report on what is happening with each of the matters that I'm handling. Okay, and it goes out to all key parties and in some cases all interested parties, and that way they know what I'm doing. Okay, they can read it, it's there, they can ask questions, and if they don't like something they can let me know right away, as opposed to finding out about it a month, 2, 3 months later, or finding out about it through some court filing or something like that. Okay, so that is me going on the offensive, if you will, okay, for the betterment of all, but also to set the industry norm. So when I talk to other potential sources of clients, again, mostly lawyers, accountants, whatever, and I tell them about this, they're like, "You do what?" Like, nobody does that. Well, I do. And they say, well, now that I think about it, it makes a lot of sense, right? So that's the kind of response we want to get from our clients and customers, is that we're doing something that maybe that nobody else is doing, but when they think about it a little bit, they go, why isn't everybody else doing this, right? That puts us on the offensive and it gives us strategic freedom. So businesses that aren't doing those things now are on the defensive. Okay, so why aren't you, like for my competitors, why aren't you doing weekly reports? And they'll give various reasons. It's too time consuming. I'm not obligated to report to these people because I have sole authority. Okay, I mean, I'm busy, I assure you. Okay, and it's true. When I'm appointed, when the court appoints me as the administrator of an estate, I'm not beholden to these other parties. I'm responsible to the court, of course, and I have to discharge my fiduciary duty properly. Okay, but I'm not obligated to seek the advice, let alone the consent of these other people. But so what? I mean, if it's an heir or an attorney representing an heir, in the end, they are the ones that are going to get the money. So if there's something going on that they don't understand, I'm better off knowing they don't understand what it is and making sure they get educated. Okay? Because that will be the way of avoiding a dispute, the best way of avoiding a dispute down the road, right? So again, look for these opportunities in your business where you can, in essence, go on the offensive, not with your clients per se, but with kind of against your competitors, so that you're setting the industry norms, you're raising the bar, and other companies, other organizations, they've got to run to catch up with you. Okay, that puts them on the defensive, and that gives you the strategic advantage. Okay, finally, victory is psychological as well as material. So the fact of the matter is, the Royal Navy in the 19th century was physically and materially dominant. However, or not however, and everybody knew it, right? So psychologically, a lot the Royal Navy had a big advantage. And in fact, because Great Britain had a global empire, it was one of the reasons why the colonies that made up what then became the United States, a lot of the colonists and even entire colonies were reluctant to fight a war against Great Britain because they psychologically they just knew that there was no way to beat Great Britain. Okay. And so we want to create that sense that we are it, right? This is take a company like Nvidia, which makes chips for, among other things, um, the sort of data centers that power things like large language models and such. Well, Nvidia it works hard to create an image that you cannot be doing cutting edge AI technology without its chips. Now, there is some truth to that, okay? Because many of the chips they have are very advanced, and if one is working at the cutting edge of this new technology, you need the best chips in the world. This is why it's been so astonishing that Google has come up with, well, not Google, Alphabet, the parent company of Google, has come up with some chips that maybe this is the discussion going on, are superior to NVIDIA's best chips, right? Because it pierces that psychological perception that NVIDIA is necessary to be playing at the upper echelons of the AI game, right? Now, of course, you have a country like China that does not want that psychological perception to endure. China does not want the United States to be dominant in AI. And if you remember, I believe it was last year, there was this issue with I believe it was called DeepSeek, how it was much more efficient. It costs far less to develop, and it was revolutionary beyond Chat GPT and Perplexity and these other US based AI models that were available. And it turned out that that was not really the case, right? But the idea, I think, with DeepSeek was to try and pierce the psychological perception that the United States, or United States based companies more precisely, are dominant in the development of large language models. Okay. So we want to create as great a brand strength as we possibly can. Now, we oftentimes think of brands as being these large companies, NVIDIA, ChatGPT, Coca-Cola, to use one from the non-technology world, right? But a global brand is important if the business is doing work, is doing work globally, but we can develop a local brand that is in many ways just as powerful, so that we're known to be the local player in whatever our field is. Okay, we could be the dominant plumbing company, the dominant electrical company, the best chocolatier, right? John Kelly here in Los Angeles is a top, local chocolatier, at least according to many. Okay, and so the power of our brand is in part defined by the size of our market, right? John Kelly, in terms of an international brand, is nothing. It's a small company. It doesn't have an international, it doesn't even really have a national presence. It has kind of a strong regional presence, and it has a very strong presence here in Los Angeles. Okay. But it's working on growing. Maybe one day, John Kelly will be a powerful national brand like, I don't know, Hershey's. Okay. Hershey's is a powerful international brand, right? So when we think about creating the psychological victory, okay, over that is more powerful than the material victory, we need to consider in what realm is that relevant, okay? And that's a function of where we do business, right? So I have a pretty powerful um, reputation in the sort of greater Los Angeles, moving out into Orange County, Inland Empire area. I'm working on building it throughout California, but also extending it into other areas, Texas, the Southeast, etc., where I've already done some work. Okay. Now I don't want to going back to point number one. I don't want to dilute my core business here in California by trying to reach out too far. So I do it judiciously. And although when people ask me, I say, well, I have a national practice because I do. The reality is that most of my practice is centered in California and the Southeast. That's where I've done the most work. And so that is my current focus. Okay. And you would be wise to shape up your business in a likewise context. Okay. So that is this week's take on Alfred Thayer Mahan's book, The History of Sea Power, the Influence of Sea Power Upon History. We have one more week to go. Next week, we'll wrap it up. So I hope you'll join me next week, Tuesday at 10 a.m. for that. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. And then, of course, we'll be back next week for the full slate of shows. If you have any questions, comments, criticisms, thoughts you want to share, links to my social media will be in the show notes when this episode posts on LinkedIn. Please do share them, and I will be happy to. First, I'm happy to hear your criticisms because I'm always looking for a way to make the show better. But I'd love to hear your comments and engage with you on that as well. If you know someone you think might be interested in the show, I would really appreciate it if you maybe send them a link to the show. They can take a look at it, and that would give me an opportunity to earn them as a subscriber. And by the way, if you're not a subscriber, please do consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Just go to youtube.com/thewaytowow, and you'll see, you can click on the subscribe button. So thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure. And that just leaves me to sign off. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.